Today, I have witnessed a digital blasphemy in the form of Fortnite's rendition of Zeus. Yes, you heard it right. The almighty Thunderer himself has been reimagined in the world of Battle Royale. But let's just say he's not exactly looking like the King of Gods that I know. Fear not, for I have enlisted the help of the sculpting wizards at CA 3D Studios to conjure up a Zeus that would make Mount Olympus proud. Get ready as I resurrect Zeus from the digital underworld. Now, if it wasn't that obvious, this is a 3D printed model I have printed on my 3D printer. My current printer of choice is a Uniformation GK2. I have two of them because I really like them. Now that is out the way, it's time for me to prep this model. It has already been taken out the printer and cured, but it's time for me to actually sand it and get it ready to get its primer layers and then paint it. During all the prep work, what I'm actually going to be trying to do is install some wires that are going to run right through the entire model, and this is going to be what's going to light the LED that hopefully might light up his lightning bolt. I don't know if it will, but I need to do quite a few modifications. I've managed to get wires in his leg already and inside of his pant. Now it's time for me to try and put it into this torso, which is going to be quite difficult. So what I'm going to do is cut out quite a large portion of this model, which means essentially I will be modifying it drastically. And once I have access to the inside of the model, it is time for me to start figuring out how I'm going to actually light up this lightning bolt. And I found these really small surface mount LEDs. They're super tiny. I don't actually know the voltage on them. I don't know anything. I'm just going to do this trial and error. I'm going to solder some wires to this LED. The first thing I did, which I did off camera, was solder the wires on and check that the direction was the correct way, because I have no idea how to use these things. And look, I managed to get them to do what they need to do. Now, you can't just have white lightning bolts because that's boring when the model is not lit up. So I used Talisar blue and I watered that down and sprayed it just on the tips of both of the lightning bolts, and I used a gloss clear over the top of that transparent resin to make it nice and shiny, and moved on to painting the skin tones. This is one of my favorite parts recently, actually, since I've figured out my new skin tone painting set. And this is basically the same process that I've done all along, except for I've now found some colors that I can replace one by one, instead of having to buy an entire set. But first and foremost, the most important thing of painting skins is to set up that volumetric highlight with a lovely zenithal and a white ink. After I've done that, I paint him into Barney, because Barney is always the best setup for skin tones. Don't ask me why, but that is the way that it works. As you can see, I'm using a color that I like to refer to as pinkle. This is somewhere between pink and purple. And this goes all over that volumetric highlight. And while that's drying, I'm going to use some deck tan to spray the lovely robe that Zeus is wearing, because Zeus wears a robe like he's just come out of the bath. Don't get that wrong though, because Zeus will definitely make you not feel like he's come out of the bath. But what is not out of the bath is the red transparent paint that I paint into the shadows and over all the black parts of the model that was left from the volumetric highlight stage. And again, that needs to dry, and while that's drying, I'm going to add some shadows and some highlights onto the robe of bath for Zeus. While all of that dries in the background, it's time for me to start working on the base. And the way I'm going to do this is very simple. It's honestly the most simplest thing ever. I take deck tan and I dry brush the living daylights out of this rock. When I'm done with that, I spray Skeleton Horde over the top of it, and I use Agrax Earthshade to spray into some of the shadows. And sometimes I might use a little bit of Drakenhof Nightshade as well, but realistically, that's it. That's my rock done. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. Now for the skin tones, this is as simple as layering the tones on top of each other. In a previous video, I did mention that I'm going to go more in depth on this on my Patreon, and I obviously had someone complain about that. If you cannot pick out from this video how to do this, then maybe the Patreon is somewhere for you. I don't post every single day new videos, but I do post behind the scenes whips and stuff that you don't get to see on Instagram or any other social medias, as well as I will be making some more in-depth videos on some of the techniques and procedures that I use to paint my own models. And hopefully, while I was talking all of that waffle, you managed to pick out what I had been doing with the paints and the types of paints that I've been using and all the rest of the nonsenses that you might need to know in order to reproduce this technique. I don't call it a technique, actually. It's just painting. At the end of the day, for me, painting is all about figuring out how to solve a certain problem, and in most cases, or in some cases, that problem involves skin tones for people, and for me that used to be a big issue. It is no longer my issue. I'm super happy with my way of tackling skin tones. If you like this look, then you might want to try some of the painting techniques that are used in this video. Otherwise, if you don't like it, then there is a very special message for you in the last few seconds of this video. Also, to continue with painting the model, what I did was used bronze from Monument Hobbies as my gold. And yes, it's not actually gold, but if you look at it in the right light, it definitely looks like it's gold. So I'm going to use that as the base tone for all the gold on this model. And I did obviously try to take a slightly easier route to painting this model. I do that with most of my models because the way that I feel about this is that painting a good looking model should be accessible to almost anyone. And in reality, my views on painting models is that you don't have to go all out and be completely ridiculous. It doesn't matter if there's a bit of overspray. It doesn't matter at the end of the day. Just try to make your model look cool, and you don't need all these crazy techniques in order to do that. You can use some very simple techniques to make your model look good. Once I've got the robe painted to the satisfaction of what I needed, I then decided that it was time to get the wires all connected throughout the model. Now obviously, running these cables through the model was not the most simplest thing, and this is why I chose not to actually record putting the cables in, because this was a nightmare. And again, for the sake of making this as simple as possible, that almost anyone could do it, I didn't actually solder these cables. You can do this in other models as well. The only thing you couldn't do is getting the wires to be soldered onto the LEDs, but some come with them anyway. Usually at this point in the video, there's supposed to be some kind of a twist. Maybe I did something wrong and I'm supposed to keep you tagged along until the end of the video, but I don't have that, so just watch anyway, please. But if you are actually already starting to get bored, then maybe check out the link in the description for CA 3D Studios. That is a sponsor of this video. They sculpted this wonderful, glorious statue, and it's available on their Patreon, and you should go check it out right now. So now that I have the wires tied together to the wires that are in the body, which is also tied together to the wires in the hip that are just literally dangling out the back here, I need to now paint the rest of the leg so that I can connect the wires from that to that and then connect it to there. Annoyingly, this does mean that he's going to be one with his base forever, and that's just how it's going to have to be. But if I want lights to be all the way in his hand, I think that's the only way. I probably could have actually done it in his torso. Thinking about it now, I could have maybe made it so that the batteries fitted in his torso, but this is not what's happening, and this is how it's happening. As you can tell, I am still trying to figure out this whole video thing. Apparently, it's quite difficult to make an entertaining video if you don't know how. So now would be a good time for you to let me know if you've liked any of the changes that you've seen in the videos over the last couple of weeks, and or not. As I look at the wasteland that is the middle of a painting project for me, I have to make a decision on what is my next steps, and as I had already mentioned, it's time to tackle these legs. What you can see though is that I've kept in this video some of the support marks that I just didn't clean out of this model. This is one of the things that drives me absolutely nuts. I absolutely hate this, but it happens. There's not much you can do about it. I'm this far into it. I'm just going to finish this model, and we should all just be happy that if we don't look at it from certain angles, we can't see any of the support marks left over from terrible preparation. Painting his feet was pretty simple, really. I just used Cygor Brown to paint all the straps and his lovely sandals. Once I was done with that, his legs were essentially done, and it was time for me to tie the cables together on his legs as well. I then glued in the leg, not before I very carefully shoved those wires up into his body, and then I used some Reikland Flesh Shade to add some shadows onto the rest of the golden bits on his body. I did dry brush this with a brighter gold later on, but I don't think I actually recorded any of that. I didn't glue Zeus to his base because I put some magnets in his feet. It is not the strongest of situations, but it works fine for the situation he is currently in. And as you can imagine, after painting the lovely golden leaves around his head, I've used a lot more deck tan to paint the rest of Zeus's hair and his eyes, brows. And once I was done with that, I painted blue into his eyes to set myself up for the glow that is going to come later. This, instead of doing the black, is going to help to create the effect that his eyes are glowing and it's not just white, because that would look not so good. I also used a very watered down blue in my airbrush, very thin down, like basically a glaze, and I sprayed that to make sure there was a bit more of a glow. And after I was done with that, I painted the shape of the whiteness of his eyes using deck tan, and I highlighted that and called the model done. It is now important for me to say a very special thank you to my patrons. If you want to support me and this channel to grow and keep making videos every single week, then I need you to go check out the link in the description for my own personal Patreon if you want to keep the lights on and blinding my eyeballs. And now, if you didn't like anything that you saw in this video, I really don't actually care, and you can f*** off.